Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another tank review. This time we are taking a look at the Tier 7 British premium tank destroyer, the AT-15A. As ever, I will give a little bit of history to this thing before kicking off, though honestly there isn't that much to say about it. If you try doing a quick internet search for this machine, for example, you can't really find any more details than you get in the game client itself. Essentially, the British, alongside the Americans, were developing a project to assault the Siegfried line. So these were going to be very heavily armoured machines with guns that were hopefully capable of, well, taking stuff out on the Siegfried line that was necessary. And this culminated in the T-95 or T-28, depending on how you want to call it, for the Americans, and the Tortoise for the Brits. And the AT-15A here is just another machine on the developmental road to the Tortoise. You can think of it as a scaled down or a prototype version of the AT-15. It's basically the AT-15 but with a 17-pounder gun, in short. So what is it that you actually get in the game itself? Well, yeah, here we go. First thing to note, this is a large machine. It is very big. It was the first tank destroyer for the Brits to be added into the game, and actually, since it was added in, it has received a couple of buffs. When this thing was first brought into the game, it had 850 hit points, and it got regular matchmaking. For some unfathomable reason, it saw tier 9s. This, of course, is at tier 7. I say for some unfathomable reason because this is a machine that's main strength, and we're going to look at this in a bit, the main strength of this machine lies in its armour. And the armour was pretty much worthless against tier 9s. It was kind of dodgy against tier 8s, if we're going to be honest. However, subsequently Wargaming saw the light, and they have effectively given this tank 3 separate buffs. One, it got a buff of 200 hit points, so it now has 1050 hit points, which is not too bad. It's a lot for a tier 7 tank destroyer, but then this is an assault gun style tank destroyer, so they do tend to get a bit more HP because you expect them to get shot a lot. Two, they gave this thing limited matchmaking, so it now only sees tier 8 opponents at the worst, which is a very, very, very good thing. And thirdly, when they gave this machine a HD model, they effectively buffed the armour. We'll talk more about the armour in a bit, but that is most definitely a good thing. So this is a premium tank. You do not need to grind anything for this machine. Don't need to worry about that. You just need to be aware of the cost, which stands at 6,500 gold. For a tier 7, how does that compare to some of the other tier 7 premiums in the game? Out of curiosity, Panther M10, 5,750, VK45, 7,700. What others do we have? SU-122-44, 6,750. For the Americans, you've just got the Scorpion that occasionally comes around. It's not for regular sale. In the tech tree, what others have we got to compare it with? There aren't really that many others, but from that little selection, it's about in the middle. It's not as cheap as the Panther M10. It's not as pricey as the VK4503. That's a pricey tank for a tier 7 premium. So price-wise, yeah, sure, it's the middle of the bunch. Why not? And you can buy it for regular sale in the tech tree. It's not one of those tanks like the E25 that just comes around periodically and Wargaming tries to squeeze you for money on it. What I would say, however, is that it's tier 7. Bear in mind, for that cost, it does not get the enhanced credit making potential that you see with tier 8 premiums. So do just bear that in mind. So, what do we get? We're going to talk about the gun in just a moment. I mentioned you've got 1,050 hit points. Armour, again, we'll talk about this more in a bit. 101 on the rear, 152 on the sides, 228 on the front. Like I said, the armour is really the strong point of this machine. Mobility, however, is not. It's a 65-ton tank with a 650 horsepower engine, giving it a sub 10 horsepower per ton specific power. Top speed of 20 kilometers an hour, top reverse speed of 10, traverse speed of 25.6. This is a slow, sluggish machine. So if you don't like slow, sluggish machines, if you need a bit of mobility, then like pretty much the rest of this British tank destroyer line, this being the original British TD line I'm referring to, this is kind of out. Concealment, this is a big tank. Let me just show you how big it is. This is the AT-15A. Let's compare that with... What can I compare that with? I know. This is a Panther. Panther's quite a big... Or Panther 2. Panther 2 is quite a big tank. There we go. The Panther 2 is slightly taller than it. This is a big machine. Okay? Let's not make any bones about that. This thing is large. And as a result, camouflage, really not its selling point. So yeah, view range is also really not its selling point. This thing gets a 350 meter base view range, and it's quite difficult, for reasons I'll come on to in a moment, it's quite difficult to squeeze that much more view range out of this machine. But we'll get onto that in a bit. Let's quickly talk about the gun. So the gun is yet another 17-pounder. You might be tired of these guns by now, but do bear in mind when this tank was introduced into the game, a lot of the tanks we now have with 17-pounders didn't exist. Well, not in the game, anyway. So it's another 76mm 17-pounder gun, 14 rounds a minute rate of fire. You know the stats by now. 171 penetration, 150 average damage, 239 pen if you want to fire some APCR, and some kind of trashy high explosive. 0.32 dispersion at 100 meters, so that's good accuracy, and a 1.9 second aim time. Which is also good. And some stats that aren't shown in here. You can see if you dig deep enough, but some stats that aren't shown in here. 10 degrees of gun depression, good. Gun elevation is not that fantastic. None of these assault-style British TDs have particularly good gun elevation, which is a little disappointing. You'd think for a machine that large they could elevate the gun a bit, but whatever. A very good gun traverse, though. You'll see that when we get to the gameplay. Very good gun traverse. So you can pretty much kind of almost poke this gun around corners as you're coming around. It is very nice gun traverse. Just out of curiosity, I thought we'd compare this to a bunch of other Tier 7 TDs just to make a point. So you've got 150 alpha damage, which is pathetic. That would be low on a Tier 7 medium tank, let alone a tank destroyer. So we've got here, I'm not going to compare all these stats because we'll be here all day, but we've got here the AT-15A, E25, Challenger, Kruppstreier Waffenträger, Jagdpanther, and the T-28 HTC. So a variety of tanks to compare it with, and I wanted to take a quick look at just one or two stats here. So basically gun stats. We know that the, so firstly we've got the stated firepower values that the game assigns each of these tanks. These are all Tier 7 tank destroyers. 304 for the AT-15A puts it kind of in the middle, perhaps towards the lower end, but kind of in the middle. But the things we're really interested in, rather than this kind of nebulous number, are 1. Okay, gun traverse speed. This is not a stat that's particularly relevant for most machines, because usually if they're stating that value, it's because the machine doesn't have a turret, and so they are stating that to give you an idea of how quickly the gun itself moves. However, if you've only got a limited traverse, that doesn't really matter. Slightly different with the AT-15A, you do have quite a wide gun traverse, so it is slightly more important. 27.73 degrees per second, it's good enough. Right, gun depression, 10 degrees. Gun elevation, also 10 degrees. Just for anyone who's played some of these other machines, to give you a sake of comparison, E25, 8 degrees of gun depression, 15 elevation. Challenger, 10 and 20. Kruppstreier, 8 and 45. Jagdpanther, 8 and 14. And the T-28 HTC, 4.4 and 15 respectively. Gun traverse limits. With the AT-15, it's 25 degrees each side of the center line. The only machine here to have a wider traverse arc that doesn't have a turret is the T-28 HTC. And the T-28 is actually an interesting comparison. That's probably the other tank in the game that is the most similar to the AT-15A. The value I really wanted to bring your attention, though, was the average damage per minute. So for all of these tanks, this is for a 100% crew, and I've given them all a gun rammer, because everyone will give them a gun rammer, why wouldn't you? And a few little points of interest. 2,481 DPM, how does that compare and contrast? Well, it is higher than either of the turreted machines in this comparison, the Challenger and the Kluppsträger. And honestly, both of those machines actually get higher DPM than for example, the T25/2. So, the DPM is higher than a turreted tank destroyer. Although, not by that much. Bearing in mind, the Challenger packs the same gun, same alpha damage, and gets a fully rotating turret, and the Challengers, well, it's about 150 DPM down on the AT-15A. The Kluppsträger, of course, does at least get higher alpha damage and higher penetration with that long 88mm gun. Okay, so how does this compare to the non-turreted tank destroyers? E25, 3,129. Nowhere near. Jagdpanther, 2,713. This is still, say, 250 DPM ahead and gets 320 alpha damage and higher penetration. T28 HTC, 2225. So, again, the T28 performs relatively similar role to the AT-15A, and the AT-15A does beat it in terms of DPM. They have about the same penetration. The T28 does have a 105mm gun for that 320 alpha damage. So there is that to bear in mind. But T28 gets full matchmaking, the AT-15A does not. The point I'm trying to make, and I've been kind of laborious with this, sorry about that, but the point I'm trying to make is that despite the fact that the AT-15A gets pretty terrible alpha damage at 150, given that it doesn't have a fully rotating turret, the DPM is actually not astounding. It's okay, but it lags some distance behind machines like the Jagdpanther, you know, those typical tier 7 tank destroyers, and when you compare it to the DPM monsters of tier 7, the E25, and I could bring up the Su-122-44, but it's a similar story, the AT-15A is just blown out of the water. So do bear in mind the DPM from this gun, despite the fact that it's a little pew-pew nickel and dime gun, and in your head you think, oh, well, the DPM must be fantastic. It's not. It will be more than kind of medium tanks and heavy tanks and whatnot. So for tier 7 the DPM will be pretty good, but compared to other tank destroyers, not so much. So what about crew skills, equipment, and all of that jazz? Well, this is a premium tank, so honestly you just slap in any premium, any British tank destroyer crew. Bear in mind, because this is a Nuffield style tank destroyer, you do have 6 crew members. So if you own this thing and you haven't gone down the original British tank destroyer line, it's going to be kind of awkward because the other British TD line doesn't use as many crew in their machines. Something that's worth bearing in mind. But in terms of crew skills, you'll honestly just want whatever crew skills the guys had anyway, but if for whatever reason you want to give them specific crew skills because you want to have a specific crew for this machine for some unfathomable reason, if that is the case, Sixth Sense on your commander, safe storage is always a good bet on the loader, everyone basically wants repairs, and then brothers in arms. This is not a sneaky tank destroyer, you're not going to be using your camouflage, you're going to be using your armour and hoping you can put your tracks on pretty quickly and things like that. So that's your crew skills. Equipment is slightly interesting. Gun rammer, because why wouldn't you want a gun rammer? 10% more DPM is awesome. Vents, all-round buff to the entire thing, why not? And then the third equipment slot is kind of up to you. You don't want to take a camo net, because as I said, you're not going to be being very camo-y. So I think there's a genuine choice here. Toolbox, that improves your repair speed, so that can just get those tracks on a bit faster, which is very valuable. When you bear in mind you don't have a fully rotating turret, so that is not a bad choice, and that has been the one that I've tended to veer towards. Heavy spool liner is also not a bad plan, that's what I used to use. 30% to armour protection from ramming and explosives, 30% protection to the crew from injuries, and now with the artillery's new modified mechanics, minus 10% to stun duration. It does make the tank even heavier, it does weigh a whole extra ton, but honestly you're not really going to notice that much difference, so that's another viable option. You could put an enhanced gun laying drive on, but honestly, I've played this tank with and without this equipment. I've not noticed a difference. The gun aims pretty quickly anyway. Coated optics, your base view range sucks. An extra 10% of bad is still pretty bad, so I wouldn't bother with coated optics. If you do want a vision enhancing piece of equipment, binocular telescopes are probably the way to go. However, they need to be stationary in order for you to use them. And this tank doesn't like being stationary because it's so slow. In order to stay in the fight, you really want to be moving. You don't want to get in the habit of staying still much. You want to be moving a lot. So I would and camo net, you're not sneaky. I would recommend either a toolbox or a heavy spore liner. It's not a super heavy spore liner. The tank isn't quite heavy enough for that. But a heavy spore liner. They would be my two suggestions. Which one you pick for that third slot, I leave up to you. Ammunition, well, back in the day, well, firstly, you have 70 rounds of ammunition with this tank, which sounds like a lot, but when you're only doing 150 alpha damage, you can burn through them if you're not careful. Don't bother with the high explosive, really. The high explosive is trash. It can work on some machines, but you're at tier 7, firing 76mm high explosive. The only way it's really going to be useful is if you're shooting at a very lightly armoured German TD or something. It's very situational, and I wouldn't really bother. I carry 10 rounds of APCR and 60 rounds of armour piercing. This was the loadout I used to take when this tank saw tier 9 matches. And that's when you really needed the APCR. You've now got limited matchmaking, but I haven't changed the ammo loadout because lately Wargaming have introduced an awful lot of tanks with very thick frontal armour and basically no weak spots. Certainly not when your AP has 171 penetration. You know, we're thinking things like the Japanese heavy tanks, the VK101P, the new tier 8 premiums, the Patriot, the Defender, the Chrysler K. The list goes on, you get the idea. So I would still say have some APCR. Armour piercing will be fine most of the time if you've got a decent knowledge of weak spots. But a bit of APCR is no bad idea to have around. Just bear in mind that even with APCR, especially if you're at range, some targets might still be non-trivial to penetrate, let's put it that way. Consumables, I've just got repair kit, first aid kit, repair kit, and manual fire extinguisher. I haven't really noticed any particular fire-related problems with this tank. Generally speaking, if you're getting set on fire, it means you're being shot in the bum, and you're probably dead anyway. So you might want to swap out the fire extinguisher for pudding and tea. Why not? I wouldn't bother with the fuel consumables. They give you an extra 10% engine power and turret traverse, but you don't have a turret, and your engine is a turd, and you can polish that turd as much as you like, it's still a turd. So an extra 10% of NAF is still NAF. You could always swap those repair kit and the first aid kit, of course, for the large versions of that equipment, I guess, if you wanted. Just bear in mind, whilst this thing can make some money, it's not a credit printing machine like a tier 8 premium. I don't think there's anything else really to say in the garage itself, so let's have a look at some module locations, the armour layout, and do a bit of shooting. So, here we go, AT-15A module locations. Right, from the left-hand side, we've got the radio operator sitting here in the side of the hull, and the radio down here if you really care about damaging that, with the fuel tanks, unsurprisingly, towards the rear of the tank. We have got, sorry, we have got a crew member back here, might be a radio operator, can't really make out the symbol back there. Looks like a loader over here to the right hand side, engine at the rear of the tank, not too surprising there. More fuel tank over here, loader here, loader here. This tank has two loaders, of course, bear that in mind. That looks like the driver there. And one thing to note here is one of these loaders effectively sits in this little machine gun turret at the top. So if you can shoot this machine gun turret, and you can from pretty much any angle, you'll kill a loader, which will reduce the tank's reload time, which will be kind of annoying, or increase the tank's reload time, I should say, which will annoy the AT-15A driver. Ammo rack is just in here. It's not particularly easy to hit, or it's not really an obvious location, but the ammo rack is there from above. It is a giant target for artillery, so do bear that in mind. Right, here we go with the AT-15A, and boom, there is the armor profile. So, rear of this tank, you have got 102mm on the rear of the lower hull, if you will, 102 on the rear of the upper hull. Here, however, you have side armor, which is 152, and that can make this region of the rear of the tank relatively difficult to penetrate. The roof of the engine deck is only 25mm thick. Bear that in mind. So, if you are firing despite the sloping, if you are firing a gun that is 75mm or lower in caliber, just don't bother. Generally speaking, it's pretty much an auto bounce angle, and you'll have other easier bits to hit. If you're firing a gun that has a 76mm caliber or larger, you will just completely overmatch this region anyway. So, but if you've got this thing from the rear, just shoot it down here or up here. You can shoot this rear bit of the machine gun turret up here if you want, but these are easier targets from the rear. Side armor. Lower part of the hull, we've got 102mm plus 30mm of spaced armor from those tracks. 163mm of effective armor. Side of the hull is 152 with some thicker zones. So even flat on, lower tier tanks are going to struggle to penetrate this, and that means that you can angle this thing pretty effectively and start getting some fairly decent armor values. So that is something worth bearing in mind. Frontally with this tank, lower down here, this thing doesn't really have a lower plate. The quote-unquote lower plate is its thickest armor at 229mm thick, so don't try and shoot it there. Here, there is a plate that is 76mm thick, sloped back at 65 degrees for an equivalent angle of 151mm. So, if you've got, let's say, 170mm of penetration and you're trying to shoot this, this would be an option. Just bear in mind, this thing's got 10 degrees of gun depression. If he's using that gun depression, this is going to be an auto bounce angle, so then you do not want to shoot that. Side sections, 229, 152 but angled, 229, 229, 152 but angled, 229. It's probably not even worth bothering with these side sections here unless you have a very high penetration gun. If you've got a gun with like 250 pen, say maybe tier 8 tank destroyer, sure, you can punch straight through there, but for everyone else, not so much. Around the gun, just don't even bother. It used to be, I want to point this out, because it used to be that the AT-15A had a hole around the gun where there was no armor, and if you put shots straight down the gun effectively, you would penetrate this thing. When they gave this thing a HD model, however, they went, nah, let's get rid of that. So this gun mantlet, with this whole area, I mean, I think at its weakest is 305mm of effective armor. At its strongest, well, there's 787, 784, you just don't bother. Don't shoot it around the gun. Now, weak spot time then. Let's just zoom in for a little bit. You'll notice that the top of the AT-15A is stepped. You've got this lower section and this upper section, and the armor on that sloped section between the two is 76mm thick, sloped back at about 65 degrees. This means you can penetrate this region with guns with, let's say, 160, 170 penetration and upwards. So that's a weak spot for your tier 7 heavy tanks, essentially, and some medium tanks. You've also got this machine gun turret up here, about 150mm of armor on this machine gun turret, 138 if you shoot it just there. One of the loaders lives up here, so if you manage to penetrate this, there's a reasonable chance you'll knock out one of the AT-15A's 2 loaders, and that will make the reload time suck. So that will make the AT-15A driver a very sad panda, and it's always a good idea to try and shoot here if you want. And if the AT-15A is trying to use his full gun depression, or if you as the AT-15A are trying to use your full gun depression, well, that thing is still going to be visible. It's a giant target. But again, to emphasize, you can angle this tank. Let's say you were doing that. Round a corner, poke your gun round the corner. There we go, there's the full extent of the gun traverse. So you were poking your gun around a corner, and what sort of armour values are you looking at? Well, that goes up to 265. That is still potentially a weak section if you're fine, if guns with, say, 180 penetration and upwards are shooting you. This section is only 102mm thick, but at this angle that goes up to 228 effective. 231, 249, 233, 259, 226, 286, whole bunch of nope. That is still a weak spot. So there are a couple of points that can be weak, but you can angle this tank and still shoot people, which is it's a novel feature among tank destroyers. And yes, there are still some relatively weak regions. I mean, this is about 180mm thick. Bear in mind, this thing's only at tier 7. So the armour on this machine really is a selling point. If you're angling like this, honestly, the only real weak point is just up here. One thing to note though, if you can hide that machine gun port up there, then you're away. So if you come around a corner angled like that, the machine gun port is potentially visible. If you come around a corner the other way, yeah, it's one of those tanks, and you have the wall here blocking this whole, as we look at it from the front left-hand segment of the tank, your machine gun port is actually blocked off, and penetrating this thing suddenly becomes a bit of a pain in the wazoo. Yeah, so the armour on this thing is definitely a bonus. Bear in mind this plate can be a bit of a bogey, but the armour on this thing is definitely its strength. Okay, gameplay time. As ever, we are going to try top tier and a bottom tier game to give you an idea of how this thing performs in each. Bear in mind, limited matchmaking, so the bottom tier game, quote unquote, is only going to be a tier 8 match. It's not going to be a tier 9 match. So we're kicking off tier 7, top tier, here on, what the hell is this map? Steps? Yes, Steps. I win the special prize. There's quite a few tier 7s on each team, so whilst we're in a top tier matchup, you could argue the matchmaking could be better, but obviously it could also be worse, so that's okay. This is an encounter game, and I have decided to come over to the section of the map where the heavy tanks tend to duke it out. Bit of a risk, because if our team flub over by the capture circle and the enemy team decides they're going to cap, there is no way this thing is fast enough to go over and do anything about it. Having said that, I think you're taking a risk either way, but I reckon that I'm going to find a fight a bit sooner over here, and also I'm coming around corners the correct way, if that makes sense. So I might actually be able to hide my giant great machine gun port on the top of this tank if I'm very, very, very lucky. And there we go. We take a shot into the side of an IS, but would you credit it? We only damage his tracks. We don't even blow the tracks off. We only damage them. Well, woohoo. KV2 is looking at me, and I realise I don't really have much support here. It's me and a T-29, and that KV2, he don't need to penetrate me if he's using the big derp gun, and, well, if he's got any sense, and he's gotten that far in the grind, he will be using the big derp gun, so there's that to think about. Hello, Mr. T-29. 143 to you. I'm going to reload before you do, but you decide to back off, and I just bounce off your frontal plate. KV2 round the corner, let's not get shot by him. 1050 hit points can disappear relatively quickly when there's a 152mm howitzer trying to screw you over. Accuracy does us good there. Shot into the IS as well. Looks like he's going for that machine gun port on the top of our tank, but the IS, well, it's not the most accurate machine in the world. He's trying to spot a side scraping. I have a punt. T-29's there instead. Going for the T-29 or the IS's drive wheel. That sounds like a tracking shot, but he repairs it because he's not an idiot. And you can see here we're just nickel and diming these guys to death, but they're not idiots. They're not just sitting there and letting us shoot them time and time again, he says, as the T-29 sits there and lets us shoot him twice. Through the lower front plate of the T-29, perfectly good, and you can see the accuracy of this gun is coming to the fore. We also had a shot there against that IS. One against the T-29. Sounds like we tracked him. He is dead. This is the other T-29, of course, who basically just threw his tank away. And we're not penetrating all of these shots. We're certainly going for that sort of reload, and oh dear. There's a T-37 behind me. There is yet another T-29 coming up in front of us. Should have aimed for the machine gun weak port. Someone's taken out my loader, and this is where the fact that you don't have a turret sucks, because they are everywhere. The enemy team essentially swarmed this side of the map, and there was actually a fire from people shooting us in the bum. I was talking about fire extinguishers and whether you'd want them or not. We'll take out that Sherman. And the reality is, if someone's shooting you so that you catch on fire, that T-37 is a jammy little swine. You're probably kind of screwed anyway. T-29 dies, the enemy one that is. Unfortunately, he's behind our T-29 ally. He's dead, which is good. I'm on 227 health. And actually, I take it back. I was set on fire, but somehow we have survived. We'll see how long that lasts. Enemy T-29 here has quite a lot of health, and I think he's shooting up at our weak spots. Looks like he may not be a complete fool. That one missed, unfortunately, and trying to track this guy, because otherwise, yeah, I'm going to have two of them on me at once, and that is, well, it's going to suck. That T-29 and the IS that I spent so long shooting at. And our Leo appears to have a case of the gonna have to mash the map, because clearly that's gonna make everything better. Is he dead by any chance? Would you credit it? He's dead. He probably wouldn't be spamming the minimap if he weren't. Now, on the one hand, unfortunately we died. On the other hand, it took them an awful lot of effort to kill us, and there's no way that T-29 and IS are going to make it to the base in the 7 seconds they've got before we cap this one out. So, swings and roundabouts, and we actually win this game by capture, base capture. But a win's a win, I'm okay with that, that's fine. We did the best we could on our flank. Sure, we died in the end, but we were effectively playing a stalling action. It seems the enemy team had loaded that western flank on the map quite heavily. So, let's go and have a look at the results to see how well we did. That game ended up being enough for second class mastery, fire for effect, and the Bruiser medal. Seem to get Bruiser a lot lately. 1,680 damage done, which is not too bad. 1 kill, 861 base experience, and top of our team. That T-29 who was with us managed 985 damage, which, that's 3 shots, not that impressive. But there we go. And on the enemy team, none of them really did particularly well. T-37, 1135 damage. That's not too bad from him. Ditto for the Jumbo. Yeah, what can you do? So 1680 damage from us isn't too bad. The only one in the match who did more was our artillery. So fair enough. 22 shots fired, 19 hits, 12 penetrations. A lot of those shots we weren't aiming fully because we didn't want to let the enemy fully aim at our weak point. 13 hits received, 5 penetrated, 8 did not, for 2,220 damage blocked by our armour, which is pretty nice for a tier 7. 5 enemy vehicles damaged, 1 of them executed, 419 assistance damage, and a 27,000 credit profit, which for a tier 7, this is with a standard account, for a tier 7 is pretty good. That would have been 46,000 credits with a premium account, that's pretty good. It's not tier 8 premium tank levels of awesome though. It's just pretty decent. And yeah, bonus XP for the premium vehicle tier, sure. So we made some experience. It wasn't, overall, it wasn't too bad a game for us. That was the top tier match. No premium ammo fired. Let's have a look at the bottom tier match. Well, here we go then. Tier 8 match. So the matchmaking sucks, and actually if you look at what we're against, there's quite a lot of tier 8s on the enemy team, and quite a few of them have some pretty respectable armour. Quite a lot of heavy tanks in this game. However, we are on Himmelsdorf, which is not a bad game for, sorry, not a bad map for this tank, generally speaking, especially when top tier, because you've got less of a worry about artillery, of which there isn't any in this match anyway. Yeah. but, well, we'll see how this goes. The thing is, if I go down Banana Alley, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to run head bang straight into things like the OHO, and I can't penetrate an OHO frontally without double tapping the 2 key. So instead of doing that, I decide to climb the hill. Why not? Our Scorpion, by the way, is whinging about the map, and it's like, I can see what you're getting at, but you've got a 128mm gun with a fully rotating turret. You can just go round the corner and blat people. I don't really have that luxury, but anyway, I'm not going to complain. So I was going up here to hopefully not run into the OHO. That was the plan. Unfortunately, lots of the enemy heavy tanks seem to have decided to come up here as well, which is certainly no bad plan, and that includes the aforementioned OHO. God damn it. Well, there goes that idea. Well, we're going to do what we can. I'm not going to go all the way back down and now go down Banana Alley, because I'd have an IS-3 to contend with anyway. And this thing is slow enough that it'll just take bleeding ages. Trying to not be too aggressive here, because that's a lot of enemy tanks, a lot of angry enemy tanks. A lot of scary angry enemy tanks. But I'm not achieving anything where I am, so let's move forward a little bit. And speaking of the OHO, hello, uh-oh. Right, side of the turret, I can penetrate that, right? So I said side of the turret, oh no, that's the front of the turret. Well, bother. He's aiming for my weak point, and I've switched to APCR. No apologies about it, because I actually want to penetrate this guy. And, yeah, he doesn't have weak points, because I'm not going to try and complain about this too much, but because that's how Wargaming have decided to take their tank design. He's now dead, however, and the scoreline is 4-1, so hurrah. That's nice. But we did fire a couple of rounds of APCR. What are you going to do? AMX 1375, he's a nice soft squishy target, and we pick up the kill on him. And now around the corner we've got a 112, T32 and T26 E4 Super Pershing. Scoreline is 6-2, so this game is going fairly well so far. Unfortunately, going around the corner this way, my weak point, they might take advantage of it. Which is kind of sad, but there's not much I can do about it. If I go around the other way, I face off against an IS-6 and potentially get shot from down in the town. So, yeah. It's a bit dicey either way. I'm choosing to do this as the safer option whilst trying not to hem that IS-3 in. But as it is, it's a really awkward position. That T-32 has managed to get himself hull down. So you know what? Screw that. Let's go and deal with the IS-6. Or go and try to deal with the IS-6. The enemy team are capping, so we do really need to kill these guys on the top of the hill, because this is where most of our team is. So let's see what we can do. IS-6 is another tank that, since they changed the armour, doesn't really have any frontal weak spots for 171 penetration, which is a bit of a shame. Yeah, you've got those tiny little blips on the top of the turret, although in practice I don't think I've ever actually been able to penetrate those. And he penetrates me, which is a bit sad. So I am firing more APCR here because, well, I don't really have that much choice. Put one into the SU-152, who has since died. And trying to get past this wreck. My commander's been taken out, which is a little unfortunate, but there we go, c'est la vie. The IS-6 is now dead, hurrah. So let's see if we can do something about this T-32. We've got an Oni who's gone into the cap circle to do something about that, so credit to him. Credit where credit is due. We've finally won the hill, although it took almost 5 minutes, which given I think we had a numerical advantage. Maybe we didn't, I don't know. Either way, we've won the hill. So let's see if we can do some damage to the T-32. It's very unlikely that I'm going to get to go anywhere else this game because I am so slow. And that Scorpion who was complaining at the beginning is still complaining. And I physically can't move. I'm hemmed in by an IS and a T-32 and people are grinding against me, so I can't even aim the gun. And there was APCR against the lower front plate of a T-32. Twice. Bounced. He's dead. So you can't even penetrate the lower front plate of a T-32 anymore with your armor piercing, which is a bit Sad. Same for the Tiger 2. You can't really penetrate the lower front plate of him from close-ish ranges with 171 penetration. So you're really kind of limited on what you can do against some targets with this gun. And again, a reminder, this used to see tier 9s. Anyway, going to speed this along a little bit because watching this thing try and trundle around a map is a painful, painful experience. Oh no, let's go back to regular speed because then I can put you through some of it so you can see what it's like. I'm here. All the rest of the team have just whizzed past me. And our Scorpion is still complaining. Just waiting for them to catch up with the Super Pershing. By all means, go and get yourself a cup of tea. Super Pershing has 4 kills, by the way. Credit where credit is due. I don't even think I was paying attention anymore because I am never going to get there in time to do anything. But I'm going to force you to watch it just to give you an idea of how slow this tank is. Also, the armour this match didn't do as much as I would have liked. Where were we penetrated? Let's have a look at that. 1, yep, that took out the loader, and 1 into that roof space that I was talking about, where you can be shot, and that took out my commander. So these are all locations that I pointed out as being problematic in the armour profile, so do bear those in mind. Anyway, let's go and have a look at some post-game stats. Okay, here we go then, the results from that game. Second class mastery, fire for effect. Finished relatively low down on the team list. It was one of those games where a lot of people kind of did a bit. So a lot of the XP scores are pretty close together. 1,148 damage done, which is still more damage than we have health. 1 kill, 793 base experience, but here's the kicker. 13 shots fired, 12 hits, 8 penetrations for that damage count. 5 hits received, 2 penned, 3 did not. 960 damage blocked by our armour. 4 enemy vehicles damaged, 1 destroyed, 1.57 kilometers travelled. And in a premium tank, we made a loss of 5,500 credits because we fired some APCR at the OHO. We were never going to penetrate him anyway. And some APCR at the IS-6, ditto applies, and if we'd wanted to do any damage against the T-32, it would have been a very similar story. So 29,500 credits on ammunition. This 17-pounder APCR ammo is expensive and still does piddly amounts of damage. Even with a premium account, that would have only been an 8,500 credit profit. This is not a tank in which you are going to print money. It's just not. So, with all that said and done, let's jump back into the game. Verdict time then. AT-15A, what do I think of it? Well, it's not bad. There we go. No, it's not a bad machine. It finally has the limited matchmaking that it always needed. It finally has that bit more health that really always needed. And it finally, with the HD modder, they remove some of the armor holes, which does make it more comfortable to play. But the way the game is going, this gun is feeling increasingly lackluster. That penetration of 171, you can still do good things with it, but if Wargaming keep introducing, let's say, tier 8 premiums with no frontal weak spots, what are you going to do? Would I recommend buying it? If you like slow, heavily armoured TDs, and you think the gameplay looks like it might be for you, and if you already have a British tank destroyer crew from that original TD line, the one that culminates in the FV215B183, good god that's a mouthful, the mighty Death Star, this line, if you already have a machine from that and you're looking for a premium and you think it might be fun, go for it. Why not? Buy it on discount though, don't be a muppet, don't pay full price for this thing. Buy it when it's at least like 10% discount or something. If you don't have a crew from this line, you're going to struggle to crew this thing because it does have 6 crew members, or space for 6 crew members. It is not a credit printing machine. You will have to dip into that APCR from time to time. And you're only doing 150 damage a pop. You're not a tier 8, so you don't have the enhanced credit making potential from that. So you're not going to print credits. It's an okay crew trainer, but again, that's only really relevant if you're using British tank destroyer crews. Otherwise, who cares? Yeah, it's... I wouldn't rush out and go and buy one. Now, it is entirely possible that this tank will disappear from the tech tree at some point. Wargaming did go through a stage where they were removing tanks from the tech trees that had limited matchmaking, which of course this thing now does. But that was a year ago now that Wargaming were doing that, I think, and the AT-15A is still here in the game. So bear in mind that it might happen, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime too soon. But it's a nice collector's item. And it's not a bad tank, but I wouldn't rush out to go and buy this thing. Certainly not for 6,500 gold. If I'm going to be honest, you know, it's certainly not a bad machine though. If I have a look at my service record, bear in mind this is a tank I've had for a very long time. So these stats are going to include stats from the time when I was, well, worse than I am at the moment. But what have we got? 219 battles played, 56% win rate, 461 average XP per battle, 1.22 destruction ratio, average damage caused 838. That should be going up now if I'm going to be honest, because a lot of these games were played back when this thing saw tier 9s. So bear that in mind. This can be a fun tank, and basically if you think it looks fun and you've already got a usable British TD crew and the money's burning a hole in your pocket, sure, go for it. If you're a bit undecided, honestly, there are probably better machines that you could pick up, so I wouldn't rush out and buy it. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to say about the AT-15A. Hopefully you found it vaguely useful and or enjoyable. If you did, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and as ever, I wish you a very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.